Every so often, something comes along and completely revolutionizes the way that we look at the world. Most of the time, it's technological in nature. The wheel, fire, the industrial revolution, cell phones, and the like. Other times, it's something emotional. The various art movements, musicians, or illustrations. One of these illustrations didn't start out as an emotional powerhouse. It started out as a simple daily comic in the newspaper. But over the course of 10 years, it would come to be hailed as the last of the greats, creating instant fans out of readers, and still manages to stay relevant almost 30 years after its final publication. What began as a simple story about a boy and his tiger came to embody the unfettered joy of childhood, while celebrating and immersing itself in sly asides about humanity, life, and the girl next door. This time on The Graphic Reader, we take a walk down memory lane and visit the iconic, timeless, and powerful Calvin and Hobbes. Hello, and welcome back to The Graphic Reader. I hope you had a wonderful summer, and I'm so glad you're joining me for our new season of episodes. So today, I'm joined by a friend of mine that I've known for almost 40 years. So this is Buttons. He's a hippo that I got as a child and became my constant companion for many adventures when I was small. Now, as you can see, he's been through some rough times. He used to have eyebrows and nostril dots. And, some of his stitching is coming loose. His tag is long faded, so I don't know who made him. Regardless, for a long time, we were completely inseparable. So the reason why I'm introducing Buttons is because I wanted to talk today about the most influential and enduring comic I've ever had the pleasure to read. I'm talking, of course, about Calvin and Hobbes. The story of a precocious 6-year-old and his tiger has spawned a lot of debate and study over the years and still draws in new fans daily. First debuting on the 18th of November 1985, Calvin and Hobbes ran for 10 years, with the final strip running December 31st, 1995. Originally, it only appeared in 35 newspapers, but the strip grew quickly, and in the first year it had grown to 250 newspapers and was also starting to appear in foreign language papers as well. And by the end of its original run 10 years later, over 2,400 newspapers were running the strip on a daily basis. In those 10 years, not only was an entire generation of comics readers, being molded and being inspired, but the way comics creators and syndicates were operating were also experiencing major upheavals. But, I'll get to that eventually. So, to start out, I need to talk about our two main characters, Calvin and his stuffed tiger, Hobbes. So Calvin is described as a precocious, mischievous, and adventurous 6-year-old boy, while Hobbes is presented as his sardonic stuffed tiger. Personally, I like to think of Hobbes as a voice of reason for Calvin. Now, one of the most fascinating parts of Calvin and Hobbes is the fact that when no one else is around, Hobbes is a tall, anthropomorphic tiger. But whenever anyone else is about, Hobbes is just a small stuffed tiger. So Watterson has stated that Hobbes' true nature is never resolved, and that the reader just experiences a so-called grown-up version of reality that is juxtaposed against Calvin's. And while the strip never really ventured into political territory, there were themes of environmentalism, flaws of public opinion polls, relationships, public education, and philosophical quandaries were common themes that ran throughout the entire series. Now, Calvin's adventures dominate the series, and the supporting cast provides foils for his ideas, his schemes, his projects, usually with poor results for Calvin. His parents are the long-suffering type who are trying their best to understand their child, but sometimes questions why they became parents in the first place, and honestly, any parent can readily identify with them. Susie Durkins not only lives on Calvin's street and attends the same school and graded him, not as his only friend outside of Hobbes. But whereas Calvin can be rude and obnoxious, Susie is polite and studious. But don't take her for a wilting daisy. She will not hesitate to smack Calvin down if his shenanigans get too obnoxious. She likes to participate in more traditional activities of playing house or being a high-powered lawyer, while Calvin plays a house husband. While much kinder than Calvin, she's been known to have a mischievous streak herself, usually when Calvin tries to cheat on a test or has attacked her with the water hose or a snowball. Now, several other secondary characters pop up throughout the series, including Calvin's teacher, Mrs. Wormwood, his babysitter, Rosalind, and the school bully, Mo. Calvin also has an amazing imagination, usually presented through his science experiments, or his alter egos, Spaceman Spiff, the interplanetary hero, Stupendous Man, the superhero, and Tracer Bullet, a film noir detective. Another aspect of his imagination was the creation of the chaotic and inscrutable game Calvin Ball, in which there is no rule other than all participants must wear a mask covering the eyes, and that the game cannot ever be played the same way, played with the same rule on the fly rules twice. A big part of the enjoyment of Calvin and Hobbes is the sheer absurdity and timelessness of Calvin's antics. Even though at times the characters are wise beyond their years, their actions remind us of who we actually often are: impetuous, reactive, and wildly creative. So, influenced in part by Charles Schulz of Peanuts fame, Watterson also drew heavy inspiration from George Harriman's Crazy Cat, Winsor McCay's Little Nemo, and Walt Kelly's Pogo. And while the characters' names were deliberately chosen. Calvin was named for John Calvin, the 16th century theologian who believed in predestination, while Hobbes was named after the 17th century philosopher Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes the tiger's personality, however, does not reflect Hobbes the philosopher's outlook on humanity. Hobbes the philosopher's outlook on humanity was human lives are mean, short, and just rotten. But that's beside the point. So as the strip went on, the artwork became more energetic, especially with the Sunday strips. This was partially born out of Watterson's fight with his syndicate and also his desire to bring art back to the comics page. See, we're doing a history lesson now. In the early days of the newspapers, it was a common sight to see full-page color comics for one title. However, newsprint is a serious money suck. So more revenue had to come in, and comics were taking up ad space. Paper and ink prices continued to soar, and the only way newspapers made and continue to make money is through advertising revenue, so comics began to shrink. And with the shrinking of workspace, comics became more static. Fewer colors were being used. In order to get gags across, the jokes had to be condensed. The other big factor? The sense that the comics page is for kids. Anti-intellectualism hurts, folks. And when it comes to content in comics, it hits hard. People weren't reading comics because they felt it was beneath them, so newspapers began to reduce their size so as to put in more intellectual stuff, which, if you follow the news at all, you know it's complete garbage. And as pages shrink, so does the possibility for intelligent comics. It becomes a vicious circle that eventually results in the comics page disappearing altogether, and in some cases, the paper as well. But we're not here to discuss the demise of the newspaper strip, although, I might visit that in a later video. I don't know. Anyways, I didn't really discover Calvin and Hobbes until about a year or two into its publication. In the town I was living, our newspaper didn't even carry it, so it did carry the heavyweights of the day, Peanuts and Garfield and Doonesbury, Bloom County, Far Side, for better or worse. And it wasn't until I would visit my grandparents I first discovered Calvin and Hobbes. And after that, I was hooked. The books began to be published, and my classmates would constantly talk about the strips. And whenever a classmate would get a copy of the new book, they were suddenly the most popular person in the world. Then came the treasuries. These were the big, oversized paperbacks that collected multiple books, along with full-color Sunday strips. Watterson also began to add extra stuff at the beginning, poems, watercolor paintings that truly expressed what it was to be a 6-year-old with an overactive imagination. And I began to hunt these down in earnest. These were the books I wanted to keep forever. And to be honest, when I'm out shopping at the thrift stores, I keep an eye open for the treasuries. Sure, I'll grab the original books as well, but the treasuries are always the best ones to give to someone who's never read Calvin and Hobbes before. Just last year, I finally got the complete box set, which holds all of the Calvin and Hobbes comics. But Watterson's creation has had such an outsized impact on me growing up. A friend of mine had a Volkswagen Beetle in high school that he sanded down and he painted Calvin and Hobbes on. I had a denim jacket that I drew the cover of the Essential Calvin and Hobbes on. I have 8 Calvin and Hobbes tattoos. The stories are timeless, and their effect on readers continues to radiate out into the world to this day. There are handfuls of Calvin and Hobbes groups on social media where people talk constantly about how the strip has had such an impact on their lives. There are hours of fan art that people proudly display, and Watterson's art style has been copied the world over. Now, with all this outpouring of love and affection for a series that ended almost 30 years ago, you might think to yourself, man, Bill Watterson must be ridiculously rich. And, well, to the best of my knowledge, he's doing okay. He did, however, turn his back on millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, thanks to his refusal to merchandise the characters. His syndicate wanted to turn Calvin and Hobbes into stuffed animals and coffee mugs and calendars and t-shirts, television shows, and any other sort of thing you could possibly imagine. And Watterson wanted nothing to do with commercialization of his creation. At one point, the syndicate told him they could go ahead and merchandise without his blessing, and technically they could because of the contract that he had signed when he started out. In turn, he threatened to walk away from his creation. And surprisingly enough, the syndicate actually blinked on this. Most of the time, the syndicate wouldn't care. They would just say, hit the bricks, pal. And they would have 6 other people able to emulate that art style. But the syndicate blinked. They did not want to lose the magic that he was creating. And they knew nobody else was going to be able to replicate that. And I know. Those of us who were around in the mid-90s up through the late aughts remember the t-shirts and especially the Peen Calvin on the backs of pickup trucks. I'm going to tell you right now, those were all bootleg products. Watterson never made a dime off of them. For a long time, he grumbled about how people had cheapened and corrupted Calvin. But later, he seemed to come to terms with the intellectual theft. And I actually joked that, long after the strip is forgotten, those decals are my ticket to immortality. Which I think is kind of funny because if you look around today, you barely see those anymore. But you still come across Calvin and Hobbes all the time. But regardless of how he becomes immortal, I think it's safe to say that Calvin and Hobbes, and by extension, Watterson, will live on forever. In the hearts and minds of the fans the world over. In fact, if you want to go check out the comics right now, you can head over to Go Comics and read the entire series for free. Well, that's it for me this time. I want to thank you all for coming back and letting me talk to you for a little while. Buttons also thanks you for stopping in. If you liked what you saw today, give it a thumbs up. If you want to know when a new episode drops, go ahead and subscribe. And if you want to say something about this episode or any other episode, leave a comment. And as always, if you know someone who would like to watch this, please let them know. So, until next time, this is Nathan with Buttons and the Graphic Reader saying that the possibilities are endless.